Did you know that the sun is not always calm and steady? It has cycles of activity that can affect us in various ways. And according to some recent reports, the sun's activity is peaking sooner than expected. What does that mean for us and our planet? Hello and welcome to Curiosity, where we explore fascinating and interesting topics about everything. Today, we are going to talk about the sun, our nearest star and the source of life on Earth. First of all, what is solar activity and how do we measure it? Solar activity is the term used to describe the various phenomena that occur on the sun's surface and in its atmosphere. These include sunspots, solar flares, coronal mass ejections, solar wind, and more. These events are driven by the sun's strong and constantly shifting magnetic fields. Over the course of a solar cycle, which lasts about 11 years on average, the sun will transition from a calm to an intense and active period. During the peak of activity, called solar maximum, the sun's magnetic poles flip. Then, the sun will grow quiet again during a solar minimum. One of the main indicators of solar activity is the number of sunspots on the sun's surface. Sunspots are dark regions that are cooler than the surrounding areas. They can be as big as Earth or larger, and they usually appear in groups or clusters. Sunspots have been counted every day since 1611, according to NASA, enough data for scientists to tease out 25 separate solar cycles so far. The current one is called Solar Cycle 25, and it began in December 2019. So how do we know when the sun will reach its peak activity? Well, it's not easy to predict. Scientists use various methods and models to forecast the future behavior of the sun based on past observations and patterns. However, there are many uncertainties and variations involved in these projections. For example, some solar cycles are longer or shorter than others, some have higher or lower peaks than others, and some have more or less fluctuations than others. No two solar cycles are exactly the same. Initially, peak activity for Solar Cycle 25 was forecast to begin in July 2025. However, some recent reports suggest that it may occur sooner than expected, in mid to late 2024. This is based on the observation that Solar Cycle 25 has been full of activity so far, more so than expected. Scientists at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's Space Weather Prediction Center have already tracked more sunspots than those counted at the peak of the previous cycle. They also recorded strong solar flares and coronal mass ejections, which are large clouds of plasma and magnetic fields that erupt from the sun's outer atmosphere. But does this mean that Solar Cycle 25 will definitely peak earlier than predicted? Not necessarily. As we mentioned before, solar cycles are not uniform or predictable. They can have ups and downs along the way. In fact, in August 2023 there were 115 sunspots, a huge decrease from May's 138, June's 163 and July's 159. There were also fewer solar flares coming from the sun than what we would expect from this point in the solar cycle. So it's possible that Solar Cycle the 25th of May slow down or speed up again in the future. Why does this matter? Why should we care about solar activity and its cycles? Well, because they can have significant impacts on our lives and our planet. Solar activity can affect electric power grids, GPS and aviation systems, satellites in low Earth orbit, radio communications, and even human health. These effects are collectively known as space weather. In September 1859, a massive solar flare hit the Earth and caused widespread disruptions and damages to telegraph systems around the world. This event, known as the Carrington event, is considered to be the strongest solar flare ever recorded. It also produced spectacular auroras that were visible as far south as Cuba and Hawaii. In August 1972, another large solar flare affected the Earth and the Moon between the Apollo 16 and 17 missions. The flare caused radio blackouts, power outages, and damage to satellites and spacecraft. It also exposed astronauts and passengers on high-altitude flights to high levels of radiation. Fortunately, no one was on the Moon or in space at the time, otherwise they could have suffered from severe radiation poisoning or worse. These are just some examples of how solar activity can have significant impacts on our lives and our planet. That's why it's important to monitor and forecast solar activity and space weather using satellites, telescopes, and other instruments. Space weather is caused by the interaction between solar activity and Earth's magnetic field and atmosphere. When a solar flare or a coronal mass ejection occurs, it can send a stream of charged particles toward Earth at high speeds. If these particles reach Earth, they can cause geomagnetic storms that can disrupt or damage electrical systems and devices on the ground or in space. They can also cause auroras or northern lights that can be seen in high latitudes. Space weather can also affect our climate and weather patterns. Some studies suggest that solar activity may influence global temperature changes, cloud formation, precipitation levels, wind circulation, ocean currents, and more. However, these effects are not well understood or quantified yet. There are many other factors involved in climate change besides solar activity. Space weather can also pose risks for human health and safety. Exposure to high levels of radiation from solar activity can increase the chances of developing cancer or other diseases for astronauts in space or passengers on high-altitude flights. It can also affect our mood, behavior, sleep quality, immune system, and cognitive performance. Some people may be more sensitive to these effects than others. So how can we protect ourselves and our planet from the potential hazards of solar activity? Well, there are some measures that we can take to reduce the risks and mitigate the impacts. For example, we can monitor and forecast solar activity and space weather using satellites, telescopes, and other instruments. We can also improve the design and operation of our electrical systems and devices to make them more resilient and robust against solar disturbances. We can also educate ourselves and others about the nature and consequences of solar activity and space weather. But we can also appreciate and enjoy the beauty and wonder of solar activity. After all, it is a natural phenomenon that reveals the dynamic and complex nature of our star. It also reminds us of our connection and dependence on the Sun for our existence and survival. Solar activity can inspire us to learn more about the Sun, its cycles, its effects, and its mysteries. It can also motivate us to explore other stars and planets in our galaxy and beyond. That's all for today's episode. Thank you for watching Curiosity. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe for more content like this. And don't forget to share your thoughts and questions in the comments below. Until next time, stay curious.